Each of us carries a perspective shaped by our work, our upbringing, and the people around us. For me, that perspective almost always circles back to the body, how it responds, how it functions, what supports it, and what gets in its way. Maybe that's true for many physicians, I'm not sure, but in my own work, and especially here on GynoCurious, I think a lot about women's bodies, how they've been celebrated and admired, but also dismissed, controlled, and sometimes even violated. Bodies that are strong and resilient, but also vulnerable. I've also thought it rather ironic that we often learn the most about our own bodies, not when we feel well, but when we don't. Illness demands our attention. A cough, a cancer, even constipation, these become unlikely ambassadors, pointing us back to our body's inner workings. And those inner workings don't exist in a vacuum. They are always in dialogue with the outer world. What we eat, how we sleep, the stress that we carry, the communities we belong to. All these shape how our physiology, our immune system, even our organs perform. It's a dance. The external world moves and the internal body responds. The body shifts and the external world feels different too. Sometimes the rhythm flows easily, and other times, boy, does it stumble. And that's when symptoms rise up, asking us to pay closer attention. Understanding health means paying attention to both sides of the dance, the quiet work happening within and the forces pressing in from outside. Welcome to GynoCurious. I'm your host and creator, Dr. Amy Novatt. From both sides of the speculum, we're here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. Please send comments to comments@radiofreerhincliffe.org. And if you're interested in my clinical practice, please go to dramynovatt.com to learn more about what I do when I'm not doing GynoCurious. I am thrilled to welcome Gail Straub to the studio today. We're going to talk about her newest book, Home Inside the Globe, Embracing Our Human Family, and how her career as a teacher and a global traveler have informed her life and her work. Gail is the author of 8 award-winning books and a leading authority in women's empowerment as the co-founder of the Empowerment Institute established in 1981. Gail also co-founded Imagine, a global initiative to help women heal from violence and contribute to their community. Imagine initiatives have taken root throughout Africa, India, and the Middle East, where they have impacted several million lives. Welcome, Gail.
Thank you, Amy. I'm so thrilled to be here. I love that introduction. Oh, so beautiful.
Thank you. Well, I thought a great way to introduce you and this remarkable book is for you to share the prologue with us. I think that really tells the audience, well, a lot about you, but also about the arc of the story. Could you do that for us?
Yes, happily.
Great.
And I think you're right. This is the best way to welcome your listeners into the book. So literally, for those of you listening, this is the prologue, very beginning of the book, and it's called The Calling. Throughout time, myths from every corner of the world have told that at the moment of incarnation, our calling is set before us. During the course of a lifetime, we must choose to heed the call or not. On a full moon, on January 14th, 1949, I come into this world under the sign of Capricorn. But I don't want to stay. I refuse my mother's milk, cow's milk, and several kinds of formula. A tiny being hooked up to life support. I am dying. There appears only a small chance that I will survive until I am given goat's milk. Capricorn, The 10th sign in the zodiac originates from the constellation Capricornus, which resembles a goat. It is fitting then that I decide only goat's milk will nurture me. Gradually, accepting the Capricorn's goat's milk, I begin my mighty fight to survive. As I shuttle between life and death, there appears before me a shimmering, spinning, blue and green globe. It is a presence of powerful luminosity, and it magnetizes me. Now, the spirit globe calls me to enter within its womb. And so it is that I go from my mother's womb into the womb of the globe, a mite of a creature twirling inside the shimmering sphere. I find different brightly colored doorways for exploring, understanding, and enriching this life. Enticing me through the doors, the sparkling spirit globe gives me a glimpse of what awaits me later in life should I choose to live. Through an indigo blue doorway, it's nighttime in the Sahara, where I lie cradled by sand dunes under an avalanche of stars, flooding the great desert with celestial light. And now the Tuareg nomads, piercing lament, joins the djembe drum and the stringed kora, their transcendent music filling the Sahara with the very soul of the Tuareg, the ancient wisdom of griots, truth-tellers, and healers that the world so desperately needs. A royal purple entrance finds me in a small Balinese village where, in an open-air theater, the fantastical giant barong creature with bulging red lips and a wide sweeping tail parades among us. It is fierce at first, but then sweetly gentle, now joyously laughing, but soon downtrodden, shedding big, melancholy tears. It is warning us humans that without a balance between contradictory opposites, all creation falls into chaos. A crimson red gateway opens on to the Great Wall of China, where I sit looking out over this 5,000-year-old civilization, imbued with its stoic, telescopic sense of time, indelibly illuminated by Confucius and Lao Tzu. From craggy mountains to delicate gardens and glorious temples depicted in precious, ageless scrolls, this venerable Middle Kingdom is the center of the world, even today. Spinning inside the spirit globe, there are so many doors, so many ways to experience life. Going through a door of the purest white, I stand in a courtyard in Moscow, with the sun brilliant against the deep snowbanks. In the corner sit 4 wrinkled Russian babushkas with black shawls covering their heads. Their faces recount stories of revolution and famine, gulags and burned villages. But their bright, boisterous laughter also tells of the Russian soul, ablaze with imagination and mysticism despite all odds. A fiery orange entryway finds me in South India, sitting in an open-air amphitheater with the night illuminated by bonfires as the gods Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva perform their ancient Hindu myth of creation, preservation, and destruction. Even today, the story of India reinventing itself once again, creating the new as it destroys the old, demonstrates how chaos and contradiction lead to transformation. With the sparkling lights of Jerusalem across the Dead Sea, an emerald green portal opens into a Jordanian valley, where I walk past a village mosque as the call to prayer rings out. Here, in the cradle of civilization, the Bedouins' ancient code of hospitality provides shelter for those without a homeland, teaching that with the strength of character to endure the harshest trials, we become honorable Thebes. From inside the womb of the globe, I decide I want to know this place, to follow the blue and green grail wherever it takes me. I want to live, I say to the shimmering spirit. In response, the glimmering globe announces my calling. You shall live, and you shall travel far away from home and all that is familiar, so that you experience the miraculous diversity of the human family. Only by unifying what is familiar to you with all that is different will you become whole. You will learn this for yourself, but also so that you can teach it to the world. For the world, too, can only complete itself by finding unity within its diversity. With those words, the spirit globe departs as I begin my life on this earth. But I will remain in the womb of the globe for my entire life, journeying through its many portals as I become whole. This is the story of how I followed my calling. This is my love letter to the world.
So for those listening, this book is this beautiful weaving of memoir and travelogue. And I don't know how your publishers described it, but it was just such a beautiful way to learn about you, Gail, and to learn about these remarkable places, because your words, your writing is so descriptive. I was often struck, I was like, how does she remember these details? I mean, even if she was a good journalist, it's remarkable. It was so tangible, from the sounds of the musical instruments you describe to the topographies of the places you traveled to. And then what I wanted to focus on today so much was about the kind of crucial intersection between the inner and outer worlds and how they informed you. Yeah. Because I think about this a lot. Again, as a clinician, I think about the body and I think about the external world and how it affects our internal viscera, if you will, and how our internal viscera affect the way we are in the world. And so I couldn't help it. This may be a stretch. Please bear with me. But throughout the reading, I kept thinking, the globe, the body, the experience of the inner, the outer, and how they inform us. Can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're asking me this, Amy, because when you were reading your beautiful opening, you said something about what's going on outside affects our bodies inside. And the globe is like a body. And so the book really is as much a travelogue inside my interior landscape. It's a true travelogue to about 12 different cultures, and we touched on a couple of them in the prologue. But I would say for me, equally, this started out not as a memoir, and this relates to your question. I thought, I'll just write these nice, interesting travel essays. And my editor said, sorry, kid, this is, I mean, that's okay. But what's trying to be born is a heroine's journey. As you know, Amy, there are 3 parts: girl, woman, crone, and how these various cultures affected me in those 3 archetypal phases of my life. But back to your question, I found that, for an example, I was in the Sahara right after my mother's death. So had I crossed the Sahara at a different time in life, not grieving my mother and being a lost soul and a very young woman, only 23 years old, I am certain the Sahara would have been a completely different experience. Simultaneously, I traveled through the Himalayas just after my father's death. So every one of these cultures, my experience of the culture, including the sounds and the smells and the tastes that you alluded to, is directly impacted by what's going on inside me. I think there's an inseparable relationship between the womb of the globe. I think of the globe as a womb where we all live and where the human family exists. And so it's a micro, macro, as above, so below. So if I'm traveling during a time of grief, the culture, if I'm open, the culture will help me grieve. I want to mention, again, because of the topic of your podcast, when I traveled to Bali, that was during a period when my own archetypal feminine, what I mean by that is my interior life was cut off. I was working too hard. I was only out. And I had lost, it was ironic because I was teaching about this, but I wasn't living it.
Yes.
And I talk a lot about that. So by some sort of grace or miraculous cosmic, orchestration, I go to Bali, and everything in Bali was inviting me to go inside, to pay attention to my dreams, to become embodied again, to your point in your opening, to live with my emotions, not just my mind. So I think this is probably true for others, that when we go to a place that has a profound impact on us, not every place does, obviously, there's some conversation going on between that culture and what's transpiring inside us.
Yeah. Again, I can't differentiate it. Well, I can differentiate it and make it analogous to the way the body experiences different places, different foods, different climates even. And that there are times where we might be exposed to harsher climates and kind of just rise above it, just remain healthy and feel well. And other times where we just succumb. And it is very much like the stressors of grief and how it impacts the internal narrative.
Yeah.
And then this wonderful weaving of the external narrative and the internal. And sometimes they weave together and sometimes they're divergent. It's such an interesting dance, I guess is the best way to describe it, or tapestry, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, Amy, because of our wonderful topic today, I found different cultures taught me different things about my body. And I want to just...
Can you speak about
that?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, I want to speak about that.
Yeah.
So certain cultures were profoundly embodied. I don't consider our own culture embodied. I consider it many wonderful things, but not particularly as a culture embodied. So I'll give a couple examples. The Himalayas, not surprisingly, everything in that culture felt physical to me. Everything was made by hand. Most people traveled by foot. Of course, my husband, David, and I were on foot for about a month along the Annapurna circuit. So that underscored the physicality. But the Sherpas, who are our incredible, joyful teachers, Purba and Tule, my experience of them, it wasn't just physically fit. It was that they lived inside their bodies. Watching them walk through the mountains, we walked mostly in silence, so there wasn't the distraction of chit-chat. It became a kind of walking meditation where you empty. And watching them, David and I learned so much from them, Amy. The grace with which they moved, the way they cleared their minds, the way they were strong, and then they'd break out in song, and, you know, they were singing to the mountains and things like this. So when we came back from that culture, from then on, we saw what we walk a lot. We're passionate walkers. We always thought of them. We thought of how embodied they were, how they made the walking a meditation on the earth. And then I mentioned Bali already. The women were tiny physically, but extraordinarily strong. And they raised their children in community. They consider the time in the womb. The 9 months is a period, a sacred period of preparation, both for the mother and the child to be born. And they're breastfed, and they come in, and the women dance. They walk through the mountain valleys with these massive baskets of, fruit and stuff like that. Also in Africa, this was true. Africa, Bali, the Himalayas, these cultures struck me as, rather than the first place we would go, say I would go living in the West, would be to my mind. This is not a critique. Simply an observation. I lived in Africa for 2 years. I felt my African friends went more quickly to their bodies for the answers. And the women in the villages were my teachers. And they not only were physically very strong, most their life was spent outdoors, they had a joy I know it's a little stereotypical, but to watch them dance. I learned African dance when I was there, and to watch them dance, and then the drumming would go on all night, and the entire village would join, the little ones, the old ones, everyone. And it was as if the village was a body, and drums and balafons would be going, and we would all be dancing, till the sun came up. And I know things like that happen here, but in West Africa, where I lived, that was a normal part of weekly life.
Yeah. There's something also about the description, particularly in the Himalayas, about the relationship of that meditation, of that being in the body, and its relationship to the mountains. to the topography. And, as you're describing the African dance, I can't help and bear with me. This is a little cliche too of, the stomping on the dry earth and the impact of the dust. And it's a relationship, an ongoing relationship that I think we've lost touch with a great deal in the West. Would you agree?
I do agree, Amy.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a wonderful thing to consider. I'm thinking of the 12 cultures in the book, and most of them have a closer relationship to the earth. Not all, but certainly Ireland does. There's a lot about the Celtic worldview there. Africa does in some ways. India does. I want to talk for a moment about the Tuaregs because they exemplify your point, I think, most profoundly. So one of the chapters is on the Sahara, and after my mother has died, I'm 23, and I crossed the Sahara in a camel caravan with a group of extraordinary indigenous Tuaregs. And what I'm going to say about the Tuaregs is most likely true of most indigenous peoples, but I'll give the examples through the Tuaregs. So I entered the desert. We take a very traditional route across the Sahara, and my teachers are a Tuareg called Takama, who is truly one of the great teachers I've had in my life. She towered above me. She was 6 feet tall. She had these indigo robes that swept down into the sand and coal around her eyes, and you can imagine her. And she spoke French, so they assigned her as my guide to look out for me. And through her teaching, it's a matrilineal society. And in every way, shape, and form, the women were equal to the men. Every way, every possible way. They were the healers. They led the trance dances that were considered a spiritual prayer to protect people. She showed me this, Amy, ancient, intricate herbal formulas for birth control. So she taught me all this, and when it was too hot and we get off our camels and sit under these little tarps, Takama would teach me about her people. And this journey was about a month long. And it became clear after some time that, also through the man who helped me with my camel, he was very beautiful also, it became clear that for them, they were not outside the Sahara. So I was a young American on a camel traveling outside the desert, across the desert, but not intrinsic to it. Takama and her people were not separate from the Sahara.
One and the same.
It's hard to put in words, but I gave some examples like they could feel a sandstorm coming 5 days beforehand because they could smell it. And when we came to the Great Erg, this very mystical part of the Sahara, it was so clear to me that they were one and the same of the Sahara. And I think that's part of what you're pointing to, Amy, that we have become separate.
Yeah.
But to take a more Western culture, I think that much of the Celtic worldview in Ireland has, the Tuaregs may be quite far afield from us, literally and figuratively. But, the Celtic worldview has aspired to bring this unitive point of view where we're not separate from the earth.
Yeah. Is there any association bear with me. I want to talk about the matrilineal versus the patrilineal, and whether the matrilineal cultures that you encountered, and I don't know how many of them were, did they have a different way of looking at time and place and body than the patrilineal communities?
I'm sure they did. I mean, that would be a great thing to study more, actually. The Celtic worldview is very female, non-hierarchical, circular, pagan-based, land-based, and it relates to how green the Irish are, to how environmentally active they are. I don't know for a fact if any of the other cultures I went to were matrilinear. I don't know, say, in the Himalayas.
Yeah.
But I think we could make an educated guess
Posit.
that would be true.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting? At the end of GynoCurious, I ask my guests consistently what gives them pleasure. We've talked about their work, we've talked about the art, et cetera. Like, what gives them pleasure? And almost across the board, they talk about being in nature. And it just reminds me, particularly as we speak, that even though the Western culture has moved so far away from embracing the globe and the earth in the same way as what you bore witness to, that there are still, people who are tapping into it. And I'm so grateful. I want to bring us back to the air because I have a quote here. So again, when Gail was in the Sahara and you describe hundreds of miles of sand dunes called the Great Eastern Erg, is that how it's pronounced? You say, quote, "The border between the seen and the unseen bleeds, making them indistinguishable from another." Further, you wrote, "A Saharan trance suspended between feeling that I might live forever and I am sure going to die tomorrow." Can we talk about these comments, the seen and the unseen? Again, I think about the body, what I see, the lines on my face as I age, the upset stomach that is manifest as a bloating, and then what's going on inside, the seen and unseen. Can we talk about that, please?
Yeah. I think that it's interesting because you just talked about that we all have access to being in nature. One of the places where the visible and the invisible bleeds. It's not the Great Erg in the Sahara, perhaps, but it's a place where we all have access to that. I'm going to call it mystical information that I was able to access in the Sahara. So what happened, as I described, Amy, is my mother had died and I was too young, way too young to understand what that meant. And my teacher, one day she said, "What does your mother think about you crossing the Sahara?" And I told her my mother died 3 months ago. And then she absolutely consciously, conscientiously took me under her wing to teach me how to be a woman.
Yeah.
And I think that any of us who are present, let's say, at a death, in your case, at a birth, at a time of great suffering with another human being, the veil is thin then. And even though I'm describing when the veil's thin in a particularly mystical part of the world, what I think the Traore gave me is they were really saying to me, that is accessible to you all your life. So we sit with a person who's dying, or you as a doctor, you've been at many births, and we feel something then that is not visible and not invisible, but something transcendent.
Yeah.
And I think we have access to that a lot more than we imagine.
It's become clear to me that GynoCurious has evolved to a place where I'm talking a great deal about all the different ways in which we might heal. That so many of my guests are talking about meditation, acupuncture, exercise, nutrition, modifiable lifestyle issues, but also some of those intangibles that don't have a huge amount of science to, demonstrate how they work, but they work. And I feel so compelled to share with my listeners that allopathy is only one way, and there are many, many ways, and that this diversity, this exploration into both the seen and the unseen, the known and the unknown, the science and the lack of science, all of these things have validity and value and are worth investigating because our journeys are unique. What heals me might be different for what heals you, which brings me to, you speak about diversity and differences a great deal in the book and how they enrich you as a human being and as a teacher. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah. I think that is one of the core impulses, Amy, behind the book. But before I say that, I just want to say that I think what you just described, all the diverse ways to heal are like a globe. And I believe we become more whole the more diversity we're exposed to, whether it's a culture or a healing modality. And to your point, we have our choices within that. But to stay inside any small box, I think we're robbing ourselves.
I have to break in there.
Yeah, please.
You have this beautiful quote that I think says it all.
Yeah.
Quote,
Okay.
Nothing valuable stays inside its tidy frame forever. Oh, Gail, I loved it. I underlined it multiple times because that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's such a politically charged and complicated time we're living in, and it's all about differences and divisions and so forth. But actually, and the reason I think the book is particularly timely, is in my experience, it's the opposite. It's when I go towards that which is different that I grow and I transform and I become whole. That's an expanded, open stance. But when I'm afraid and I stay in the little box that I'm used to, I can't grow as much. And I also think it's normal to be a bit, shall we say, what's going to happen? A bit afraid, perhaps that's too strong. Cautious is the good word.
Yeah.
That I think is part of our human condition. But then we get to these places, or what happened to me is I would get to someplace different. Well, let's just take Morocco for an example. And it blows your mind. And your mind literally is becoming larger. It blows your heart. Let's go back to the body. It blows your body. You're getting rewired and your circuitry's getting, livened up. And I think it affects the imagination. Your imagination is more on fire. I think it affects your physical health because you're growing, you're expanding. Your chi, your life force is revved up. And we could argue that, the stereotype is that differences are scary, they're threatening. But I would argue it's the opposite. They're healing. They're what allows us to evolve, actually, as humans.
Yeah. You also wrote, quote, disorientation leads you to curiosity. So it's whether it's disorientation, whether it is even a little fear, differences, whatever kind of provokes us. And I again, I'm such a scientist, I keep thinking about the microbiome, that the microbiome has to be diverse. It has to be constantly changing. It has to be filled with billions of different species. And that's when we're at our healthiest. It's when we try to narrow it down, when we change it by using too many antibiotics or eating wrong foods. And, we used to have no concept of it, but we are this miraculously diverse ecology of bacterium, etc. And and that's where we flourish. That's where we flourish. That's where our health lies in all of that, in a way, chaos and diversity.
That's a direct parallel.
Yeah.
I mean, that gives me the goosebumps. Yes.
So I want to just make sure we touch your work and empowerment. And I think the first thing I have to ask you is, what is your definition of empowerment? Because it's, just like diversity is very charged these days, so is empowerment. What does it mean to you, Gail?
That's good, because it's poor word. It's abused and overused and somewhat vapid now. But my husband and I, in 1980, we met and we got married. We're 44 years later, whatever. And we said, well, what's our life about? And we were so young, but it was imprinted. And we said, our life is about empowerment. We didn't know what the word meant, but it was a dharma thing. It was like an imprint or calling. And I could say it took us the 4.5 decades to really deeply understand what that word means. And particularly as the work began to interface in the global South, in India, in Africa, in the Middle East. But in a nutshell, for us, empowerment always, from the first year through these last years, empowerment is the act of understanding your own life, taking agency in your own life so that you can serve your community, your family, your world. Without the two, back to your original statement, the inner and the outer, it's not empowerment. It's only, a lot of the New Age, for me anyway, left one half out. It was very skillful in its exploration of the interior and what gave interior agency, but it didn't do enough to say that that interior agency is stunted. It's cut off unless it goes to serve a larger community, let's say it that way. That was from the get-go our dharma, if you wish. And what's interesting, Amy, this goes back to the diversity piece. We had an idea of what empowerment was. We were very young. It was before computers. We sat at our kitchen table with yellow legal pads, believe it or not. And we sort of were given this very significant workshop that we never thought would go beyond the United States, never in our wildest dreams. And so it started, and it seemed to be very effective for people, and it spread to Europe. And then it started to get to Russia and China, and then around 2010, I want to say 2008 maybe, people from Afghanistan began to come, from Africa, from India. They were the most inspiring people I'd ever met. They were the heads of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, working with the most disenfranchised people in the world. At first, David and I thought, what on earth? Holy moly, what could we possibly offer these people? Honestly, we were flabbergasted. And then a professor from Johns Hopkins, who was Indian, she had done a lot of our work. And she came to us one day and she said, I know you don't understand this. It's okay. But what you have here, this methodology you have in giving people agency, actually is the missing piece in the development equation. She'd worked her whole life in India and faraway places in the world. And we said, oh, really? Are you sure? And she said, let's do a pilot. Let's take this really seriously. And the pilot was for, they call it a ghetto, so I'll call it a ghetto in Nairobi. And women in Pune in India who had been born into brothels. So they were married at 10 or 11 and lived their lives in brothels. And we said, wow, if this could be effective for those communities, we have to take this seriously. So then fast forward many years, we took it seriously, we researched it, and we allow those people to teach us what was required. So what is required to give agency to a human being who doesn't read, or a human being in a refugee camp who's been raped and lost their family, these kinds of things. And David and I then, we were in our 60s by then, we became the student and they became our teachers. And they transformed the work we had, I think, given our best to for maybe 35 years, and took it to places we never could have gone. And I think the teaching there now, as a person who's a woman who's 76, the teaching there is, as an elder, as a wisdom keeper, there's a moment when we must become the student again and hand it off to, it's not only the next generation, that's part of it, but whoever it is who can take the work further than we could.
So you wrote, what is wisdom but the return of innocence on the other side of experience? So you mentioned wisdom. How is being a crone informed you about wisdom itself, and what constitutes wisdom for you? Not just the knowing, but it sounds like the teaching for sure, and then becoming the student. So maybe you've already answered this question, that arc.
I think this is the conversation I now have with all my friends in their 70s and 80s and some in their 90s. I think that it is partly a return to innocence. My life is simpler now. I'm writing full time. I'm not in the activist trenches anymore, which is a good thing, I think. I think as we age, there's a moment when to tap that deep wisdom, we need to go slower and deeper. So there needs more quiet, more space, less distraction, less speed, the things that are healthy when we're in mid-age. But as things have more space, more quiet, I think the wisdom comes through then. And it's depth, not breadth. I could say that the woman part of my life appropriately was about breadth, out, all doing good and things that were helpful. But now it's about depth.
And how has that wisdom informed you about your body and your health and or illness? Where does the wisdom take you?
Because, all around me, I'm losing people. I mean, that's true all the time, and we can die at any age. But obviously, as we grow older, the as they say, the angel of death is a little bit closer on the shoulder. So I think about, I tell you, Amy, I have such gratitude for my body. I'm pretty healthy still, but I know, not just in my head, but in my heart, that could change at any time. We know that's true anytime. And so there's a sense of profound gratitude to my body, and a sense I have good practices. I do yoga every day, I eat well, I walk every day, but I talk more to my body. And I listen more to my body. And I feel that each letting go is a preparation for death. I don't mean in a morose way at all.
No.
But in a spiritual way, that all the letting go of work, the letting go of whatever, more things, more sound, more distraction, more things on the schedule. The letting go of all that is a kind of preparation. And the body, my body anyway, is so much happier. I think at 76, if I tried to live the schedule that I had at even 66 or 70 even, my body would give me some signal that that's not okay.
Yeah. So, Gail, what you're talking about again is the external and the internal, and the merging of the two, what's seen and not seen, all of these things that we've tapped into throughout our conversation today. And it feels like what you're describing is that what wisdom, being a crone, has led you to this place where there's this merging of the seen and unseen, the outer and the inner, where the divide between those things, it's smaller.
Yes.
And perhaps that's part of what wisdom is about too, is that much like the folks of the Sahara who are of the Sahara, you are describing being of your body, of the wisdom of your life experience and the wisdom that your body continues to convey to you. That's inspiring.
It's
really
so
inspiring.
beautifully articulated, Amy. I hadn't thought of it the way you just said it, but as you say it, it feels true that as we age, that it's an intersection. And in the book, I say it was in the crone part of life, as we're talking about, the inner and the outer became more indivisible, but my mother and my father, because the book is dedicated to my husband and also my parents. So we could say the masculine and the feminine, I mean here, the archetypal imprints, those become more unified also, I think, the inner and the outer.
Yeah. So for those listening, one, I really offer you Gail's wisdom in her new book, Home Inside the Globe, Embracing Our Human Family. Please seek it out, because part of what we didn't even touch on today is truly about the work that Gail's done around empowerment, agency, the understanding of the capacity of all of us, and particularly women, because that's who's listening to this podcast. And I want to end with, because, people are frightened by their illnesses. They're frightened by modern medical models. There's a lot of worry going around and hardship. So I'd like to end with kind of one of the most moving parts of the book are the stories of the people you meet and work with who are facing incredibly difficult life circumstances. And yet it's often these people who teach you about hope, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. Can you share a story with us as we come to a close that might teach those listening about how hardship teaches us, emboldens us, actually can give us agency?
That's a beautiful place to end, Amy. I'm going to share the story from the Jordan chapter. We did a lot of work in Jordan, and including in the Syrian refugee camps. And they were using our empowerment work in the refugee camps. Everything had been translated into Arabic and so forth. And so one day, my Jordanian colleague said, okay, Gail, these women, they want to meet you. This work has really been helpful for them. They know you're here in Amman. So we're going to go up north. It was almost on the Syrian border. And we go into the house is hidden away, probably for obvious reasons. And we go up to the third floor. I'm with my translator, and on the floor are about 40 Bedouin women, Syrian refugees, sitting all in beautiful robes and veiled and just looking like goddesses, exquisite. And most of them had been raped, some of them many times. Many of them had lost their family. Their families have been shot in front of them. These were all things that were reported during that genocide. I sat with them. We have the little cups of mint tea and so forth, and they're telling their stories, and I'm listening, and I just can listen. That's all I can do. You know, I can't change any of this, but I could witness them. And there was one particularly brilliant woman. She had been, before she had to leave Syria, a distinguished professor, and she spoke fluent English. So up till now, my translator they've been speaking in Arabic. So now this woman begins to speak in English. And she says, here's what you need to tell people when you go back to New York. They already know the stories of rape and murder. You can read that in the paper or wherever you read. Here's what I want you to tell them, and this is the answer to your question. Tell them that human dignity resides inside each person, that nothing, no matter what the outer circumstances are, can take that human dignity. Because if we lose our human dignity, we're dead. And this coming from someone who had been through unspeakable things.
Yeah.
And she said to me, I cry still when I think of this, actually. She had so much impact on me. She said, the light of the human spirit will always outshine the dark. And I've told this story a lot now because I feel that those women also, I was with a lot of the women born into brothels. At 10, they were sold into sex slavery. They also repeatedly said to me, that's not what I want you to remember about me. What I want you to remember about me is that I have dreams like every other woman. I have the capacity to love my children. I want the same things that you want. And what I've been thinking about a lot lately is that those women, there are many more, the women in Russia taught me so much. They were incredible teachers to me. We have to stay strong. I was so blessed to meet these people, Amy. What was the gift that I could pass forward that they gave to me? And that would be in solidarity with others and to stay strong. It's not a moment now in our country to go down a dark rabbit hole. We could, all of us, me included, because it's shaky out there.
Yeah.
But that won't do any good. That's what the women in the Syrian refugee camps were saying to me, and the women born into brothels, and the women in the ghettos in Nairobi.
Yeah.
So we both, what I say to people is, we both need to recognize fully with open eyes how bad it is, And simultaneously, equally simultaneously, it's what the Balinese barong taught, the contradictory opposites. In all the ancient fairy tales, it's about holding the contradictory opposites, that we must face what's before us and never lose hope.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful place for us to end, Gail. Thank you so very much for joining me today.
What a pleasure, Amy.
So grateful. And thank you to Jen Hammoud and Maddie Rosenberg, my co-producers, and to David Hoffman, my editor. And to all of you listening, thank you for listening each week. Stay well, and please a reminder to listen to your instincts and intuitions. They are the greatest of teachers, not to be ignored.